My name is Dwayne Summers. I started in radio back in the early 90s. Not too early, I guess I should say, but a small radio station in Emporia, Kansas, where I was brought on as a on-air personality, I guess you would say, from the midnight to 6 shift was my first shift. It was something I found to be just a blast. I loved it. Even at that hour, then I loved it. From there, I continued to grow in the radio station, ended up being program director, sports director, music director, news director, several different things. Made a lot of silly decisions as a youth and got out of the career, even though several people had told me that I would do really well in radio. And I had people that had been in it for decades said, "Oh man, you've got the natural talent to do, go as far as you want." And unfortunately, as a young kid, I made a lot of bad decisions, got out of it, so paid my penance in construction for several years. And then when the economic downturn hit, construction was one of the first things to go. So I ended up thinking, well, I'll go back to radio. So I did. I sent some air checks and resumes out to several radio stations in the whole area. And Mark Warwick, WTZQ, the only one that called me back and said he wanted me for the sports, and ended up being a great time. I'm having a wonderful time there. At the same time, almost at the same time, I'd filled in for somebody at the college, at Brevard College, doing their play-by-play, actually as a color analyst for the basketball. And after about 2 or 3 games, they came back and asked me if I wanted to come on full-time. So I ended up becoming the voice of the Tornadoes and the voice for Henderson County Sports for WTZQ.
Great.
We moved from Bradenton, Florida. I'm originally from Kansas City, Kansas.
Okay.
Moved to Bradenton, Florida, where I met my wife, and we got married there. Our son Brian was born there, and we ended up moving to Brevard, North Carolina. Actually, Lake Toxway. Moved to Lake Toxway, North Carolina in late 2000. And so I took a job at a hardware store up there. Ended up going from working in the yard to being a manager of one of the stores in about 6 months. And managed their operation for a long time, and then got hired away from them by one of my customers to go to the concrete business.
Oh, cool.
So it's been an interesting road. About a year later, we moved to Brevard. I was, and we didn't really go a lot at first. We went to a couple games, but it was I could tell the frustration because it was basically high school students out there playing against college students, and they were so outmatched. It had to be very frustrating for them.
Oh man,
it's interesting. They like hearing Dad call games on the radio. That's kind of cool. I get to go to football games, and they like that. That's pretty neat for them. But at the same time, it's hard on them. At times they've told me that they wish I had a different job. So that it's hard, and it's a tough balancing act. So I try to take time when I can, to be with them. A lot of times, on preparing for Thursday night and Friday nights, I'll stay home extra in the mornings, just to spend time with the kids. So I have a little bit of time rather than leaving at 7:30 or 8 and then being gone until 11 o'clock at night. So I try to spend time with them in the mornings whenever I'm broadcasting, especially when I get home. So it's interesting. I try to I spend as much time I can with them whenever I can. So instead of going golfing on Sunday, I'll spend time with my kids just because they need that. And I realize that. I would hate to think that I would do all this just for me and then be not sensitive to what they need as children. I do and I don't, because I make so many mistakes myself, I know. But at the same time, it's one of those things where if you're not a broadcaster, you don't really notice them. But being a broadcaster, I'll notice even some of the big-time broadcasters on the networks, some of the mistakes they make. They're not always pointed out as quickly, because a lot of times they'll just pass right over them. But there's a lot of guys I really enjoy listening to. Kevin Harlan's one of my favorites. He is, and that's one guy that I love listening to call games. He started off when I first started with the Kansas City Chiefs, and then he became a sportscaster for the Fox Sports Network, for Fox Sports. So then, and then you got guys like Pat Summerall, who I've always enjoyed listening to just because of his delivery. It's so relaxed. Of course, everybody loves Keith Jackson because he's so eloquent, and the adjectives he comes up with during a game is just amazing. How he describes a game. So and I kind of have my own style. There's a few guys that I emulate in certain areas, but for the most part, I just try to bring as much excitement as I can to the game, and at the same time reel it back in and not get too emotional, because you still have a game to call. A lot of times you'll hear announcers get so excited you can't understand what they're saying. So it's an interesting balance sometimes, because you really want to paint the picture, because you got to realize you're on radio. It's not television. And sometimes I do get frustrated listening to guys on television, because they just let the television do the work for them. They just say the obvious, and it's like, wow, you're really getting paid for that, But it's different. I really do my best to, what are they wearing? Which direction are they going? What's the conditions of the weather? How many people are there? What color pinstripe do they have in their uniform? How big is one team over the other? What's the excitement level like in the stadium? Point out different things. Just kind of pick out some oddities here and there. If there's balloons or balls bouncing around the field, really I try my best to make the people feel like they're at the game. I played started off in junior high. Of course, I played football and basketball as a youngster, and then as I got into junior high school, one of the guys that I had heard about in another grade school, him and I were both quarterbacks, and we didn't like each other because we knew we were both quarterbacks. And I found out in 5th grade that I had scoliosis, and that was continually being checked. It's curvature of the spine. Well, as I got into junior high, we were starting alternating weeks, because when the other would get the starting job, then the other guy would try twice as hard in practice. So we were alternating starters basically the whole season. The doctors told me at one point that it was my decision, but if I were to take a hit a certain direction, it could paralyze me. So I decided my football career was done. So I still stayed with the program as much as I could, and even after my surgery in high school, I grew 2 inches off the surgery, and I would still be involved with the team and throwing passes, to the receivers. They begged me to come out and play, because I always loved throwing pass patterns. I could hit them in stride and throw the deep ball. And I said, I just don't think you're that good to protect me.
That's good.
Quite honestly, we weren't very good. We had a very bad football team in high school, but it was we were a small 5A school and a 6A for us, so we got beat like a drum quite a bit. So I empathize with the schools that are going through that right now. I've been there. Basketball, I continued to play basketball off and on, but again, I got to a point where the back was too much pain. I couldn't play, especially after the surgery. Once I got to college, I played intramurals, in which I broke my collarbone playing intramural football. So I had a tendency to really go all out and damage body parts, So I've had a broken collarbone, an ACL reconstruction, back surgery. So maybe it's a good thing I didn't play sports.
It might be good.
But yeah, that's really much. So I've always loved sports. Since I couldn't play it, I wanted to be involved in it somehow.
Oh, that's good.
So I tried to get involved in it as much as I could. When I first came to WTZQ, they just their sports guy they'd had for 1 year had to move away. So Greg Hargis was his name. He had to move to Texas. So Mark, the timing was pretty good for me sitting on my resume. He called me, so I want you for your sports. We'll want you to do sales also, but we really want you for your sports. And so I really tried to bring some of the professionalism and the technique that I used with college, what got me that job, to the high school level. So what we've really tried to do is up the high school announcing as much as we can. If you listen to high school sports at a lot of radio stations, it's barely listenable. So I'm sure a lot of people, I'm sure you agree. So what we really try to do is bring an entertainment value to that, make it sound as professional as we could, and everybody from the staff and management at WTZQ has been incredibly good about allowing me to do that and allowing us to get the resources to do that. So I mean, whether it's equipment or different techniques or bringing somebody else in or whatever we needed to do, they've been really good about that. And I think we've tried to do our best. I feel like we put a good quality out there.
Yeah.